Grab bags, what a scam. They lure you in with something you like.
Something with an uplifting message.
Canada!
How in the actual fuck did this air on children's television? I don't even get it. Hey, what's up guys, it's Avail here, back with another YouTube video because I don't want my channel to die, wee! So you guys really seem to like my Shivering Truth video, and I mean really like it, and I appreciate all the support that video has gotten, so I'm gonna make another video on an obscure cartoon series that nobody really talks about nowadays. Allow me to introduce you to Dan Vs. Dan Vs. is an American Flash animated television series created by Dan Mendel and Chris Pearson, and if you've ever seen the show, then you know how much of a self-insert these characters are. They are named after the creators, Dan and Chris. If you recognize the voice of Dan, he is voiced by Curtis Armstrong. You may recognize him as the voice of Snot from American Dad, or the voice of Dan from Dan Vs., or if you remember Robot and Monster, he voiced Robot. Point is, he's a very experienced voice actor, and he's been doing it for a very long time. Now, I'm personally a fan of Curtis Armstrong, so I may be a little biased in this review, but honestly, the show is just fucking bananas, dude. You have to see what I'm talking about. As you can probably tell from the title and the intro, Dan Vs. is a show that revolves around Dan. He's kind of a jobless little parasite that kind of revolves around his friend Chris, who goes along on his wacky adventures just because they're friends. And often every episode begins with a bunch of random string of events that are seemingly connected by some vague reason that Dan concocts in his head, which inevitably ends up in him wanting to get revenge, ergo Dan versus whatever the episode title is. This show can get very bizarre with Dan versus George Washington and Dan versus Elise's parents. In the end, for whatever reason, fucking RNGesus loves Dan for some reason, because in the end of every episode, he somehow gets revenge. Like in the episode Dan versus the Common Cold, he decides to, get this, take on the fucking common cold, the most common type of virus in the entire planet. Now you may be asking, how does one man intend to cure the most common disease on the planet? Well, he doesn't actually cure it, but they sort of find a cure. It's the end of the episode is very weird. To cure Dan's common cold, they give him the deadliest known super virus to man, so it kills all the cold cells. This is real. The TV show is rated TV PG, which is something very rare you see on children's television because, you know, it kind of wanted to be for adults too. Dan is a raving lunatic who shouts obscenities at anybody that slightly inconveniences him.
I demand answers! Why isn't this savage wearing pants like the rest of us?
We subscribe to Dr. Davis Siegel's child-led method of parenting.
Back off, weirdos! And while you're at it, clothe your young'un!
Keep in mind, this show aired on The Hub, 30 minutes apart from My Little Pony. The main cast consists of Dan, his friend Chris, Dan's cat, Mr. Mumbles, and Chris's wife, Elise. In my opinion, Elise is like the only downside to the show because her whole character is that she's a secret government agent for some fucking quasi-Umbrella Corp type shit. And sometimes the episodes involve her, and almost always it's her doing her government spy job, which is a very dramatic shift from the slice of life that we get from the normal show. Some episodes actually drag along Elise for the ride. Like, she can be doing her government CIA job and then they just so happen to run into Dan and Chris doing whatever the fuck Dan wants. So she ends up helping them out and giving them resources they normally wouldn't be able to have, you know, since they're fucking civilians and she's a goddamn CIA agent. A lot of the conversation online that I see about this show is about Elise and whether or not her character actually contributes to the plot, and I'm gonna kind of gloss over that for this review, but I am going to say this. Elise is an alright character. She has her ups and downs, but for the most part, she's a welcome addition to the show in my opinion. Now, with that out of the way, let's get talking about this show. The way that I see Dan Vs. is Dan is kind of the everyman. People can relate to him. He deals with common issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, and the show is just kind of showing you how someone could react to the situation in the worst possible way. Season 1 and 2, in my opinion, were the strongest, whereas Season 3, it didn't have the feel of the original season. Don't quote me on this, but I think the drop in quality from Season 3 was change of writing staff at the time. The show was going through a little bit of a hiatus, a little bit of rough development, and I think they had to change out some of the writers halfway through. The third season is still a decent season. I wouldn't say it's the best one, but it's still worth watching if you are a fan of this show. You can kind of tell that the family cruise was sort of meant to be the last episode instead of summer camp, or maybe they thought they were going to get a season 4, I don't know. The show never got a proper finale, which is kind of sad because I genuinely liked the show and the characters that were in it. It was a genuinely funny show. It had its ups and downs like any other, you know, sitcom, but with the fact that the show was meant for children, I am surprised they managed to get the amount of content they did through the censors. They straight up say kill in several episodes, like kill as in killing someone. Dan threatens children, he threatens women, men, it doesn't matter. If you stand in his way, he is going to take you down. Now, the world doesn't revolve around Dan, but the world that he lives in is definitely dysfunctional. There's weird people at every twist and turn, and for some reason, they all want to beef with Dan. To be fair, he does kind of antagonize people, but it's mostly because that's just his personality. I don't think there's a single Dan versus episode where Dan doesn't call someone a jerk. In fact, the word jerk is actually written on his shirt. The animation is definitely not the best, but it's good for what they were going for, especially for Adobe Flash. It's a very down-to-earth show. There's a lot of real world, you know, it's a real world feel. It kind of feels like, hey, I live in this world. I have issues with people, but, you know, we don't go out on a merciless revenge rampage like Dan does. We just kind of sit there and take it. Not every episode ends with him getting complete revenge, but a lot of them end with him getting complete revenge. Some end with him getting revenge in a sense, not in the way that he would like, but in a way. Like in Dan versus George Washington, he doesn't destroy Mount Vernon like he originally intended, but he does write in George Washington's diary, and the actual ghost of George Washington decides to declare revenge on Dan. The show is a fucking trip, I'm telling you. This isn't a completely in-depth review, it's kind of just an overview of a show that I believe deserves more attention, so I'm not going to go too in-depth. I don't want to spoil too much because I want you guys to actually go out and watch this show. And spoil not as in like it has an overarching story, because it really doesn't. Spoil as in I don't want to ruin the humor for the people that haven't seen this show yet. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I'd like to thank you guys for watching this video. Subscribe, you know, do whatever I don't care, do whatever you want. But I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
The beaten and the damned. He said, will you defeat them, your demons, and all the non-believers, the plans that they have made? Because one day I'll leave you, your phantom, to lead you in the summer.